Hello and welcome back, and today we want to look at Plex Media Server versus Emby. Which should you use as your media server of choice on your NAS in 2021? Now, it's worth highlighting that I have talked about one of these more than the other. I've talked a lot about Plex over the last couple of years. I've talked about transcoding abilities and extra features and this, that and the other, but Emby is a subject I've touched on very, very lightly over the years. Now, a lot of that has had to do with the idea that as I've made a lot of these videos and there's only a finite amount of time to cover certain topics, I have picked Plex overall in the last few years, but it has to have been said that a number of you, more and more, have been raising the subject of Emby, whereas Plex has become probably a little bit more corporate feeling. I think that's arguably correct. For a number of you, Emby has kind of stayed a lot more to its roots over the years, and more of you who have been utilising Plex and more features have made their way behind Plex Pass have wondered about the viability of switching to Emby on their NAS. Now, a few things about today's comparison I think it's very, very, very important to get off the bat early doors. Number one, we are using a Synology NAS. We're using the DS920 Plus. This NAS here we're going to be utilising throughout the course of this video. It's not hugely important because Emby does run on the majority of NAS systems, and although it's not readily available in the App Center, you can go directly to Emby and download it and get the app yourself and manually install it. Plex Media Server, on the other hand, is still readily available both in DSM 6.2 and DSM 7 moving forward, but it's just Emby is not in the App Center, and a number of users aren't even aware they can use Emby because they have to download it independently, and it's only people that have been using Emby for a number of years previously have decided to stick with it on the NAS system. So although we are using a Synology, you can largely ignore that. The next thing I want you to bear in mind is this is not going to be some fully fledged 1000 movie comparison setup of these media servers. I've tried to keep things as user-friendly and understandable as possible, and this video, although a number of you are going to have used Emby or Plex previously, I'm trying to make this video aimed at people that have either used neither of them or who have only used one of them. So sometimes I'm going to tell you things that you already know, and I apologise in advance for that. The next thing to bear in mind is I've tried to create these setups as day one as possible. I've set both of these up. I'm using a 920. You can see it's trying to connect to an old NAS there on Plex Media Server. But I am using Plex Media Server on the 920 with a relatively fresh build. I've put the media on it. I've used the default directories and to scan for the metadata and set it up, and I've pointed it at exactly the same directories here on Plex as I have done on Emby. On Emby, I've directed all of those different databases to the exact same directories. I've enabled all of the default settings, so all of the metadata you'll see on screen are the ones that are available to you immediately. But what I will say is that I have not tinkered with this setup a lot. So there might be things where you'll say to me, I can see there's something in that setup. Why didn't you go into library and then go into movies and then re-enable some of the options? I've enabled the default options. I've not played beyond that. The reason being is I think one of the biggest criticisms a lot of people have with Emby is it has got a little bit more of a learning curve than Plex. Not a huge learning curve, but it does require a little bit more tinkering to get the most out of it. But arguably, you do get a better, more customizable user interface on Emby than you will on Plex. And this is that whole feeling of individuality versus corporate, business versus indie, that sort of thing. And on Plex Media Server here on the left, on the 920, we've got the TV shows, we've got some movies, and we've got some of that testing we use for Plex Media Server videos in the past. But another disclaimer, and I'm really sorry to have an elongated intro on this, I am using Plex Pass here on the NAS server for Plex, and a standard free service on Emby. Now, a number of you will highlight that is a little bit unfair to use the paid subscription on Plex and the free service on Emby. I will highlight as much as possible every single thing that I point out on Plex that is behind Plex Pass, the paid premium service, all the way through this. It's just the fact I can't disable the Plex Pass features. I would have had to create a whole new account, and I think a lot of this I'm going to use the setup and the media we've used before, and given this NAS is linked, it was just a lot more hassle and reversal and cancelling of contracts to remove the Plex Pass. So when I talk about things that are Plex Pass related, such as hardware transcoding, I will highlight that later in the video. Also, I'm only using the web-based GUIs, so we're not using Amazon Fire Stick, Roku, mobile phones. We're only looking at the web interface today, so this doesn't really represent the whole service of both of these as a whole. So that was that incredibly long intro. What's OBS telling us? We've been knocking on for a good 4 or 5 minutes right now. Let's have a look. So let's first talk about these two devices and their user interface. I will say straight off the bat that I believe Plex is the better looking user interface, at least on the graphical user interface. There's a lot of customization, it has to be said, but I think whether you're coming into Plex via the web browser or the desktop, even on the home service there, I think it just looks better overall. I think Plex has got a nice slicker design. You can customize the layout on Emby. If you go into the settings on display, you can change the display mode if you like to see how it's going to look on mobile, how it's going to look on desktop. But again, for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it on the desktop view. And also you can play with different themes on Emby, but again, that is behind a paywall there, so do bear that in mind, that is part of their premium level service there. Let's with the premium service, let's open it up in another tab. We can have a little look at the cost structure there. You can see it's $5 a month, $54 a year, or lifetime for $120. So again, very comparable, a pinch less, I'd say in some cases, than Plex. And some of the services that we talk about are going to need premium features there on Emby, as you can see there on screen. Lots of it there, all the stuff with cinema mode and the trailers at the beginning. All of them slightly behind paywalls there, and the same thing goes for Plex as well. So there's a lot of, I would say, similarity on both of them there in terms of what you have to pay for in terms of services. But the customization of that user interface is one of those features. Plex, on the other hand, can't be customized. The user interface is pretty much what you see, what you get. There's very little you can do in terms of design. You can change the layout. You can change the order of things. You can change some of the things that are available on screen. If you make your way directly into the NAS server there, we've got the listings there, and you can change the order and what you can see on screen, but that's about it. The actual aesthetic in the background is pretty much fixed on Plex Media Server. So yes, in terms of design, even though Plex is less customizable, on the free service, I would still say it looks better overall, with or without Plex Media Server's Plex Pass there. I would say in installation as well, Plex obviously has the upper hand on most of the NAS brands, given that they still list Plex Media Server in their available app center, whereas Emby, you do have to go the kind of unofficial installation route. And I do have an installation video coming up very, very soon on that. But another thing I would say, definitely in terms of Emby, and I've already touched on this early doors, I think it's highlighting it again, the customization of Emby is first class. Whether you go into the settings here, the sheer level of customization is just unbeatable. If we go into the NAS settings here of customization, we'll manage the server settings. We'll look at the user interface of both of these. I might zoom in ever so slightly there on the Plex one. The options can seem a little intimidating, it has to be said, here on Emby. If we go for the options, we'll talk about users as well in a moment. But with regards to the library options, there's a lot thrown at you. As I say, it can be a little bit intimidating. And it does make a point of highlighting which options are behind the premium Emby Premier service, whereas when you look on the Plex side of things, it will grey out. I know you can't see it here, but it will grey out options that are behind the paywall of Plex. Another thing I will say, you do need the premium service from Plex in order to enjoy the dashboard for real-time information about your system. Whereas on Emby, you can just scroll straight on down and go to the plugin section, and there are absolutely loads of analytical options, absolutely loads of services, extra add-ons, server add-ons as well. drive health, statistical information, absolutely loads. Plex has kind of pulled away from the plugin side of things. They used to support a lot more third-party add-ons, and although there is workarounds, largely you cannot take advantage of plugins and add-ons on Plex. They've really closed a lot of the doors on that. So not only is Emby significantly more customizable, I would argue it also is a lot more open in terms of what you can do and what you get out of it and enjoy. Particularly some of the services that you can install, some of the services that you can enjoy. So again, if we go ahead and install that app there, this will install that application. As you can see, it's installed, and as soon as that server's restarted, we're able to enjoy that application there and some of those extras. There's just loads of stuff there, and the customization is unparalleled. Another area of customization and individuality that I think Emby brings to the table that's significantly better than Plex is its handling of metadata. So if we go into the library settings there, and we go into back into the server there, so we'll go back into the user interface, we look at it then, we'll go into the film section, there's our film section there, and we go back into Emby, and we look at the film section here, so we go into latest movies. Straight away, one of the earliest things you immediately see there is more metadata has been scraped by Emby. If we look at the matrix there, the matrix, it's got the information there in the background, it's got the scores, it's got the length, it's got information on it. You can scroll on down, find out more information about it there in the background. You can even watch a trailer if you choose. Select the trailer option. Going to make sure OBS isn't recording the audio. No, it's not. As you can see, there is a trailer for The Matrix. All there in the background, we can flick between it, and that's because it's found it from those online resources. And again, this is the free version of Emby. There's even the stuff with the actors there all the way along the bottom. You can scroll along if you choose a good old Keanu there. Because Keanu Reeves is only in one movie on this NAS server, because I've not fully populated it with different movies, you can go to the IMDb pages and find out more about the actor there. Now, if we go back to that user interface there, we can scroll down, we've got lots of analytical information about the files that we're utilizing there. If we flick over to the Plex server, the matrix there, it's got a little bit of information, it's building some information there in the background, but it wasn't able to find the trailer poster, the background there. And although we've got some extras, some behind the scenes, some lovely stuff there, we don't actually have the one most important information, the bit that we want the most. We want to see the poster. Now, it's not, it hasn't failed utterly. If we look at, say, for example, Pulp Fiction, and we go on to Pulp Fiction here on this one, we can see there, Pulp Fiction, it did have the thumbnail generated image for the poster there. We've got information. I would argue there's a little bit more information on Emby. There's even the images of the actors there, so we can look at what it says about old Johnny T there, John Travolta. John Travolta was one there. It didn't immediately give us real-time information about the actor. It didn't feel very intuitive. I would have expected to click on that and it would have immediately shown me more about the actor, as you can see there on Emby. That said, a lot more background information has been scraped here by Plex. Some of that, it has to be said, are behind the Plex pass, but still nonetheless, it was still able to pull that information very quickly and very readily there in the background for us. Now, it's worth highlighting, once again, that both of these are pulling from exactly the same source. If we go into the back end there of our server, go into the settings, go into the library, go into movies, we can see that both of them are pulling from exactly the same folder. So it's the same file all the way through. But if we go into the advanced tab here for what it's pulling, where it's pulling information from, you can see that the trailers, the extras and the automated stuff is behind that Plex pass. It's all paid for there. Also, with the cast list and the sources, you've got different sources there, but you can't pull from all of them at once and then choose the best one. Whereas on Emby, you can choose metadata downloaders from multiple sites. And then it says about lowest priority downloaders will be used to fill in the missing information. So you can actually select multiple sources rather than the one. But what's really cool is how much of it can be saved locally. A lot of this information is not saved locally in Plex. In Plex, a lot of this information is held in temp, but not saved in any formal way. A lot of the information is saved on the server inside the Plex files, but it's not readily saved. So you can, a lot of information about the library there, you can go in. Some of it's held in the background. You can look at the metadata. Sorry, wrong one. Let's go back. And if you go into the NAS for the metadata in the movies, there is the information stored under library files, contents, and there we go. There's some information being stored there. But it's still not as customizable as it is on Emby, which allows us to select where we want the data saved. Same goes all the way down to the subtitles too. And once again, all of this in the free package. You can even have the metadata saved as an NFO file, which is always useful, because then you can package that data together for use in another media server later. So yeah, look, save artwork, save it, bang, saved. It's that straightforward. And now we're saving all of that information quite easily. And if we go into the even advanced settings, there's even more settings. And again, I'm not going to play with these because the agreement was we're looking at the default setups here. But still, nonetheless, there's a lot more background options there readily available for information there in the background on the Emby server, and ultimately a more creative and better looking user interface overall. Now, another thing I'm going to take issue with on the Plex side of things, TV programs. Once again, we'll go into TV programs, we'll go into it there, we'll go to Manage Library, we'll go into there. Same goes on Emby. We're going to look into the Manage Emby server, we're going to go into the library, we're going to go into TV shows. As you can see, they are exactly the same directory. Volume 1, DS920 share, Plex Media Server, Plex Test Media, TV shows, exactly the same location. And again, there's all the ticks, all that stuff that happens there on Emby. On the Plex, I'm using the Plex Pass, so it is the paid for version. As you can see, all the stuff with trailers there, we can add stuff, all of that stuff's all built in, but we're only seeing 3 shows. There's only 3 shows listed, whereas if you go onto the Emby server and we go into TV shows, let's go back, we don't want that, we want all the shows. We've got 4 shows listed, not 3. It has managed to pick up the TV show Black Books, all 3 series with the metadata all scraped there in the background, whereas on the Plex Media server it's only selected 3, which is a real shame because Plex is generally held in very high regard for its metadata scraping. Indeed, it's a far more established platform, I believe, than Emby, yet it still didn't scrape that data in the way that I would have assumed. If we go into the Father Ted file there, we can look at how these 2 platforms deal with it. As we see, we've got the casting information there at the bottom. But what we can also see is it's only seen 1 series. It's still not selected all of that media. Whereas if we go back into here, it's not only found all of them, but it's also separated it into individual series, not seasons. Very important. We can go into it there. We can go ahead and find out more information. We can look at a trailer for it. Again, this is the free version on the right-hand side, and the paid version on the left. It's still pretty impressive indeed that it's managed to do all of that on the Emby side of things in the freemium version, but yet the Plex Pass on this NAS didn't seemingly pull all of that. So again, if we go in, we can have a look. We can see on that share, we can go into the Plex Media files. We can see all of that data is there. We can go into TV shows, and wallop, there is our 4 shows. All the data's there, but for some reason, it wasn't sourced there by the Plex side of things. So again, that's another home run there for Emby over Plex. Now, how does Plex claw this back? Well, one of the ways in which it claws things back, I think quite significantly, is the idea that Plex arrives with a number of key background services that you can add. Lots of live TV stuff, lots of online streaming platforms, lots of music platforms, lots of add-on services. Now, this is both a curse and a blessing for many users, because a lot of people have moved on to private media servers precisely to get away from all the stuff on the left-hand side of the screen there. So, whereas some people might quite like having access to all of these streaming services, all of these different extra bits of content generation, some of it is locked behind Plex Pass paywalls, and some of it is just unnecessary. It feels a bit bloatware to some people, so it's very hard for me to say it's a good or a bad thing because there's a different audience for this kind of thing. And some people just like the idea of having access to all of this, but of course you can't download this media, you're only watching it as a streaming platform. The return of the Street Fighter, my god, that sounds awful. But all of this stuff here on Plex is something a lot of users quite like, but definitely not all of them, and certainly not users that are moving away from third-party streaming platforms like Netflix and Prime Video and stuff like that. A lot of the kind of VR services, arcade ROM emulation, streaming support of Plex, a lot of people like it, but it has to be said that not everyone does, and I think Plex could really do themselves a favour and steer away from that, because it is starting to make them look a bit too bloaty as a platform overall. Now, of course, you come all this way, you want to see how media is played. So what we're going to do is we're going to select Reservoir Dogs on both of these platforms. We're going to play them side by side, and then I'm going to show you how each player utilises the graphical user interface to play back these files, because obviously this isn't going to be the same as if you're using an Amazon Fire Stick or if you're utilising the likes of your mobile phone to watch this media. The web GUI admittedly is not ideal to show off how these files are going to be played, but I still think it's important to show it off. Bear in mind two things. One, of course, that the trailers and the reviews and a lot of this extra stuff on Plex, once again, is behind the Plex pass. But for now, let's go ahead and play both of these files and show how each of them play back media. Let's go for it there. Again, we can't really remove that background without clicking that full screen button there. So again, I'm not 100% certain I quite like that if I move that mouse off screen. And what we're going to do is leave it for a moment to see if that background stuff disappears, which it does. So again, both playing back nice and easily, nice and straightforward. There's like a second or so difference between them from when I clicked play, and they're both being played back. So let's have a look at options on both of them. So they're both playing back in original format. If we have a look, it's going back to direct quality there. So why don't we transcode on both of these in real time? One cool little feature I am going to highlight very, very quickly is this lovely feature, Stats for Nerds. It's attached on Emby and allows you to see real-time information about the playback, something that I think is missing in a big way on Plex for people out there that like to see. We've got this option here, but still nonetheless, there's a lot more ready information available within the window here on Emby than there is on Plex, which is showing us just this screen here at the bottom, showing us the original playback quality. So for now, let's transcode on both of these relatively simultaneously. We're going to switch both of these now down to a 360p file. Let's got that there, 360. There isn't an option for 360. We're going to go for 328. What an absolute pain. And we're going to see how both of these react. Once again, bear in mind while it's doing all of this that in the case of the Plex one, we are using a Plex Pass membership. So if we go in to 920 there, obviously the resources now are being battered pretty hard. We've got two media services right now that are both transcoding at the same time using the system. Although arguably the Synology in Plex is utilising hardware transcoding and software transcoding on Emby. So we're not really looking at the extent of the transcode, because the extent of the transcode is more about the NAS than it can possibly be about both of these programs. But I might argue that things seem to be a little bit quicker on the uptake there on the Emby side. But once again, because we're performing both these actions simultaneously, that's not really a fair test overall. So now we're going to go back into the original quality, flick back between them to original. So again, we'll go to quality, again, we'll go back to auto. Sorry, it took me an extra second there. As we can see, but they're seeing, oh, it's such a great film. And again, the Plex, the nerd information there, reacting quite beautifully. Again, there's lots of little options. One option that I couldn't really seem to get working in what I would argue is an apposite way was the picture-in-picture mode. So if we go into this side of things on Plex and we go to the mini sidebar there, the film's still playing there at the bottom, as you can see. It's still playing along there in the background, and again we can flick back into there. But picture-in-picture on the web browser, if we go for it there, we can sync, we can download the file, we can do all these sorts of things, but that's about it. Whereas on the Emby server, what we can do is enable picture-in-picture, allowing us to move it around, and you keep the tab open on your desktop, but then it allows you to leave that playing there and flick onto other services there in the background. All of that happening in real time, with the Emby side there playing in its own private window while you can do work on your PC and do all that sort of stuff. That's quite a neat little feature, I've got to say. We can flick back to there now. Of course, if you do go picture-in-picture and then go back, something we found out in our testing, the file stops, you can't play it anymore. So again, I think in terms of playback, I think the Plex media server and the Plex client there on the web browser certainly has the more understated interface, and certainly is a lot more intuitive. On Emby, it is still intuitive. We go back to letting that continue playing, and we'll fast forward a little bit through both of them. Let that carry on, and again we are screening something on here that's probably not hugely YouTube appropriate. We'll let that play on there. If we look at the other options, and they're all pretty similar from that point, you can change the playback speed, rotation, that sort of thing, skip forward, and the same goes on this side of things. It's probably a bit more button chewable on Emby. I will say I prefer the transcoding menu here on Plex. I think it's a little bit more intuitive overall. I think playback quality on here, although it differentiates between them all, it doesn't really tell you much more. It doesn't tell you enough about the picture quality and what it's performing. So in terms of the user interface of the player, I would definitely say that Plex wins. But I would say in terms of overall output, and particularly that picture-in-picture mode, as well as handling of subtitles, and the fact that it's included in the free side of things, I would definitely give an edge there to Emby in terms of general output of what they can both do. So if we come out of it there, we'll try a different show now. We'll go into the TV shows, just to make sure it's not a fluke. We'll go into Father Ted, so they've both got that. We'll go into the first series of each of them. Both of them are using different graphics, it's worth highlighting as well. I quite like the user interface of the TV shows being listed in this fashion. I quite like that. We can enable the background there. I should have mentioned that soon. If we go into that, if we go into the listing mode, we can make the images bigger. We can even list by detail view, and then they've both got that. But I do generally find it to be a little bit nicer there on the right-hand side of the screen. Remember, both of them, even if I zoom in or out on both of them, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. It doesn't show as much information. I think it's presented just that tiny bit better here on screen on the Emby side. If we go into a file here, we're going to the first one on both of them, and again that's all the information readily available there on screen. So if we go ahead and click play on both of them, and again, if you're not hearing the music to Father Ted in your head while this is playing, you're not bloody human. It's also worth highlighting again that there's things like skip intro, that these can be enabled in Emby, but they're not enabled by default. So that's something Plex arrives and provides very early doors with a lot of ease, got to be said. And one thing a number of you may have noticed already is the fact that when I click the file on Emby, it seemingly played quicker than it did on Plex. What I will say is, of course, we are playing them one after the other, and the server has to handle the instruction in real time when that's happening. So what we're going to do is just very quickly stop both of these files. Stop the both. We're going to play a different file, but this time we're going to start the Plex one first, because I think that's only fair that we go ahead and start Plex first, just to show that it's not one-off. So I'm going to select Plex and then select Emby, go. So again, even in that play order, it still played first on Emby. Emby seemingly played that file faster overall. And if we go to the picture quality, it is having to convert it down to 416, whereas here on the Emby side, it's had to auto-convert it down to 480 due to the recording. So this time we're going to use an original file. We're going to use one that doesn't require transcoding at all, and we're going to do that by going into the test file. So let's go here, let's go back into the home area, go into the test files, and we're going to go with the 3 megabits per second HD file there. We're not going to take advantage of HEVC. We're going to go with the standard H.264 file there. So we're going to go ahead and select play now. So we'll bring them both up there on screen. And again, I do think Emby started a mite bit faster. The fact that both of these videos are seemingly running at exactly the same frame, almost effectively, but I started the Plex one first, should give you a little idea. So let's go and come out of that one. We'll try a different file. We're going to move up to the 10 megabits per second. So that's the earliest 10 megabit version there. So that will be that file. That's 10 megabits per second HD. So we're going to get ready there to click play. 10 megabits per second, 1, 2, 3, go. And again, straight away, the Emby server played first. Even though this is the Plex side, it has to be said that Emby seemingly opened that file faster. And again, no conceivable advantage, both on the same NAS, both using the same hardware, both using the same directories, and Plex is even the premium version, with it being played in the original picture quality on both of these systems. Auto direct, by the way, does mean original picture quality. As you can see, it even finished the file first there. So let's come out of it there. We'll do one final test, and this time we're going to run a slightly more heavier file. Let's go into some 4K, shall we? So let's go into this one. We're going to go into the 100 megabits per second H.264. So that's that one there. 100 megabits per second H.264 file. There is the specifications there. Same goes here. And again, we're going to play this time. We're going to play the Plex version first. 1, 2, 3, go. Oh no, sorry, absolute false alarm there. 1, 2, 3, go. Moving my hand across the screen, not quick enough there. And again, we are already seeing the NAS struggle a little bit there with these denser files. But once again, the Emby file had a faster uptake overall. And now I'm interested to see if we go for our heaviest file, what happens. So let's go back there, final testing. Let's go back, come out of it there. We're going to go for some real hefty file stuff. So once again, we're going to go straight down to 4K. This is the file that generally never gets played. We're not going to try and play these simultaneously because that's just going to be too much hard work. Actually, let's be fair. Let's go with the 200 megabits file here, H.264, and then afterwards we'll try the heavier file. So once again, 200 megabit H.264. And again, we're using OBS, so that might affect the picture quality there. But for now, let's see how long it takes Plex to play back this rather heavy 4K H.264 file. It's getting ready. It's caching there at the bottom. It's probably going to need to cache to about here. Hopefully it won't just kick us out of this. Bear in mind, while we're doing this, I will flick over to the NAS if and when this plays. But it does seem to be struggling with this format. Remember, this is the Plex Pass, so it has access to hardware transcoding as well, and it's not even choosing to transcode. It's trying to play the original file, and if it does struggle, it should automatically switch over. So it wasn't able to play back the file. So we're going to do the same test now. If we have a look at the NAS, we can see that the CPU just could not instruct it. So now we're going to do the same file, this time on Emby. Let's see, 1, if it can play, and 2, how long it takes to play. So we've got the spinning circle. We've not seen that before on Emby yet. Generally, Emby's gone straight into playback every single time. It looks like the NAS limitation, but have a look at that. It managed to play the file. It has had to transcode it down, but it has played the file. Not a huge amount, and it has been interrupted, and the caching is stopping pretty weakly. And again, this is more of a limitation of that Synology NAS than anything, but now it intrigues me that this has managed to play back this file when Plex was unable to. So now we're going to go and try that heavy file that I just talked about. So we're going to go for the heaviest file overall. This is an H.265, so UHD 10-bit HEVC 4K 400 megabits file. This file here is around 1.4 gigabytes in size. It is absolutely huge for 30 seconds of footage. That is an enormous file, and generally this file has broken many NASs in my NAS testing. So let's go ahead and click play and see how long it takes, because now the NAS should switch over to transcoding. It should try to automatically transcode over. So as you can see, it is giving it a jolly good try. We're seeing the caching there at the bottom, the conversions happening. Let's see if one, it can cache beyond 4 or 5 seconds where it failed last time, and two, can it maintain the transcoding and encoding of that file there in the background to outpace playback? My thoughts are thinking absolutely not right now. If we flick over, we can see CPU generation utilization is massive, but as we can see, it's still trying to play the file. It is not getting anywhere fast. I think it is going to play it, but it's barely going to play it for a few seconds. There we go. But look at the caching. The caching is far too slow to outpace that of playback, and it is going to hit a wall any second now, and bang. But it did still convert it. So if we come out of it there, now we're going to switch over to the alternative. So let's go back, and we're going to go for the heaviest file here on Emby, because at the moment in this comparison, Emby has won most of the comparative elements of Plex versus Emby right now. But how it plays back this enormous file is going to be very intriguing, because it has to be reminded that on Plex we had access to hardware transcoding. So it was able to play back that file thanks to it having access to hardware transcoding, whereas the Emby side has had to rely on software transcoding. And if we have a look, obviously utilization is going absolutely bananas, but it is still trying on Emby. It's trying it. It's still never going to outpace. Playback is not going to be outpaced by caching, but I'm still impressed that Emby, with only software transcoding as an option, has managed to play back that file. And I do think, in terms of overall performance, you got to give this round to Emby as well. I think it kind of really showed its legs there. And now we're going to bring things in and just talk a little bit about the services, because another area of difference, probably the last one we're going to talk about today, is what these two bring to the table in terms of services. So this can be broken down into two things. We go back into the server itself on both of them. We go into the settings. It's worth highlighting that there are certain things that Plex has that no one else does. I mean, for example, I mentioned earlier on Plex Arcade, not something strictly limited to NAS use. It's only used in third-party use, and it is an additional payment, but it does allow you to play old emulated ROM games on Plex. It's still an extra paid service outside of Plex Pass, so it's very hard to use that as any kind of comparative feature, but it's still a nice little extra. On the other hand, Emby, on the other hand, as touched on earlier on, does have all of those lovely plugins still readily available. Stuff that you can really tailor and change a lot of the features and functionality of your device. As you see here, we can get playback reports, we can get real-time information about our device. All of this pulled by using these tools. So as you see, we've installed that tool that allowed us to monitor the system, the breakdown of time, playbacks, real-time analytical information in that plugin. And remember, it's the free usage device. Now, yes, you've got dashboard here on Plex, but again, dashboard is a Plex Pass feature. You have to pay for this analytical side of things. And even then, I would argue it's not as good as this free plugin that comes with Emby. I know it seems like I'm really coming down on the side of Emby throughout this whole video, but what I will say with Emby is it does still seem to keep that indie community spirit. When it comes to when there's problems in the lifetime of your product, it's worth highlighting that Plex, although there are lots and lots of solutions and it does have a premium support service, time for time when you look online, if you encounter problems with your server, if you have a Plex Pass account, you have access to premium services, but a lot of those services aren't really as comparable to that of the community support of Emby. Yes, it's a little bit flakier. Maybe you're relying on humans, a little bit of their own personal support, which isn't for everyone. But I think overall, the Emby community, if you move away from paid, a 24/7 support staff on a phone line, I think the Emby general community is a little bit more active and more helpful than that of Plex. Plex has a lot more going on in its development and background, and I think that's why it's on more platforms. It's a lot more evolved as a client platform for many, many users, and ultimately why a lot of users know a lot more about it overall. And again, as mentioned, the business of the transcoder quality and everything that happens in the background, we can see that the customization options are generally more readily available on Plex Pass than they are on that of the free service. And Emby still gives you a lot more in terms of that encoder and transcoder in the free service. It does highlight, again, for hardware transcoding, you need to use the paid service, but most of the options are readily available straight away. Even the cinema intro stuff, as you can see, you do need the Emby premium account to take advantage of it, but you can use your own trailers if you choose to, which is good. Whereas on Plex, you have to have the Plex Pass service, a paid service, I should say, to take advantage of any kind of trailer support on Plex. I'm going to wrap things up on a final note to do with DLNA, in other words, enjoying media on the local area network, because a number of people, when you do take advantage of a media server system, and again, whether that's Synology, QNAP, whatever, it's worth highlighting that DLNA support on Plex is still very, very good, but still requires an active internet source sometimes. You can enable the DLNA media server option on there, but a lot of people have reported that if you don't have at least a semi-active internet connection, occasionally Plex loses contact with your server, which can be difficult. Whereas Emby seemingly has a lot more configuration, a lot of that whitelisting ports, and not whitelisting ports, but opening up preset ports, with a lot more configuration than there is here on Plex, which, although it has a lot of those options, I think it's presented a lot more intuitively on Plex. I think it's a lot more understandable. They go to a lot more lengths to explain things, whereas Emby, although a lot more analytical and a little bit more intimidating, does give a greater deal of control and maybe security configurations externally and on the internal network. Ultimately, what I'm saying is between these two, it goes back to my earlier point that on these two platforms, Plex is far more user-friendly, I think. Unfortunately, it's less customizable. It allows a lot of the options to be preset early doors, and I think it does a better job of presenting information to you readily, immediately. But then when you're within the confines of that user interface, the amount that you can stretch and change and make it unique to you and your media setup is just not as readily available as it is on Emby, with its arguably more ambitious and higher learning curve day one setup options. It's seemingly found more information, and I haven't even touched on areas such as adding users. For those of you that aren't aware, when it comes to adding users and groups on both of these services, both of them allow you to add lots of users that have got access to your servers, but Plex put that behind another wall, unfortunately. So when you add other users or create users who have got control, or whether they're just guests or more, some of these options still need Plex Pass out account, so the paid for services to really make most of it, whereas Emby provides these by default very early. It's nice and simple. You can just create an account at any time, say if they've got access to everything or preset folders, really change everything they can and cannot do, and that account then is activated very fast on the free service, something that's kind of missing there on Plex. And again, this leans into just how much of Plex's development they've been sticking behind that Plex Pass. But I'm going to wrap things up now. Hopefully on screen right now, there's pretty much what both of these two got right, which ones they got wrong, and ultimately what they do well individually when comparing between the two of them. Of course, this is only based on the web graphical user interface, and it is not based on if you're using third-party external client devices, you know, your phones and Fire Sticks and Roku and the like. And I will be doing a video after this comparing Plex and Video Station, Synology's own application, as well as another video comparing Emby and Video Station coming soon. And of course, other NAS brands to follow. But perhaps you disagree with me, perhaps you agree. Maybe you've got your own point of view on Emby and Plex that I haven't touched on, or you disagree with me. Let me know in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, click like. If you want to learn more about these media platforms, network attached storage, media servers and data storage in general, click subscribe. And if you are interested in getting hold of a new media server solution for you, your family, your business, your whatever, but you don't quite know what to buy, use the free advice section at NAS Compares below. There's a full detailed breakdown there that will help you every step of the way of different services and different hardware considerations. It's not a paid service, it's free advice. There is a human being to talk to there. We're not doing it for profit, we're doing it to help. We may be a bit slow, an extra day or two to answer, but we will get there in the end. So do visit the Contact Us section and free advice section of NAS Compares. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.